I spent 2 days making the perfect Thanksgiving feast. My mother-in-law sneered, "His ex always made this so much better." I said nothing. I packed every dish and left. 4 hours later, Lucas showed up pale, asking what I'd done. My three-word answer left everyone speechless. I had been awake since 4 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. The house was submerged in that heavy darkness that only exists right before dawn. I stood in my kitchen in wool socks and a flour-dusted apron I'd had since college, basting a turkey that had been brining since Monday night. By Thursday afternoon, when I finally loaded everything into my SUV, the inventory was staggering. A 14-pound bird, its skin glistening like polished mahogany, a cast-iron skillet of green bean casserole, a jar of homemade cranberry sauce laced with orange zest, 2 deep dish pies, a Dutch oven of mashed potatoes still radiating warmth, a woven basket of honey wheat rolls I'd finished shaping at midnight. I was bone-tired in that specific hollowed-out way that only comes from pouring everything you have into something you're genuinely proud of. I drove 45 minutes to my in-laws' immaculate house in Westerville. 40 minutes later, I was reversing out of their driveway, gravel crunching under my tires, with every single dish still sitting untouched in the back of my car. 4 hours after that, my husband appeared on my mother's front porch, his coat shrugged on wrong, looking like a man who just realized he'd been standing in the wrong room for a very long time. And right behind him, my cell phone began to ring. What I said when I finally answered, 3 quiet words, made every person in my mother's kitchen stop talking at once. But to understand that silence, I have to take you back to the beginning. My name is Stella. I'm 34, a registered nurse at a hospital about 20 minutes from our modest home in Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Lucas, is 37. We've been married 6 years. Our daughter, Poppy, just turned 4. She has her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, a trait Lucas loves to point out. From the outside, we're the picture of an ordinary family, and mostly, we are. The friction never came from my marriage. It came from the periphery. The thing about my in-laws is that nothing they ever did was big enough to point to. No screaming matches, no overt cruelty, just atmospheric pressure. A comment here, a comparison there, a sigh, a glance. If I described it at a dinner party, people would tilt their heads sympathetically and say, "Surely she didn't mean it like that." And they'd be right. She probably didn't. That was the hardest part to swallow. Linda, my mother-in-law, is 62. She clawed her way up from a childhood defined by scarcity, and she spent 3 decades curating her life to look like effortless abundance. She isn't cruel exactly. She's careful, guarded, and cares with an almost terrifying fervor about what the world thinks of her. And that care spills outward, smothering everyone in reach. Cassie, Lucas's 29-year-old sister, is polite enough on the surface, but she has one habit I've clocked for half a decade, bringing up Lucas's ex-girlfriend Ryan, far too often for it to be accidental. Ryan and Lucas dated for 3 years in their mid-20s, long before I existed. I've never met her. Some days her ghost takes up more oxygen than I do. Warren, my father-in-law, is a man built of silence. He rarely speaks more than 3 sentences in an afternoon, but he has never once been unkind to me. And in a house built on subtle judgment, that silence has always mattered. I want to be clear that I wasn't walking into that Thanksgiving blind. I wasn't a naive bride hoping to finally win them over. I knew exactly how Linda operated, down to the cadence of her comments. I fully expected Cassie to bring up Ryan before we'd even taken our coats off. I made the feast anyway, not out of desperation, but because I had 2 rare days off. My kitchen smelled like heaven, and sometimes trying is its own reward, regardless of how it's received. Early in my marriage, eager to please, I brought a homemade blueberry buckle to Sunday dinner. I knew the moment I pulled it from the oven that it had betrayed me. Tragically flawed, far too heavy on sugar, missing the sharp bite of lemon zest. Linda knew it too, setting her fork down after a single microscopic bite, lips pressed into a thin line. But Warren quietly ate 2 full pieces, pushed his empty plate away, and muttered that it reminded him of a pastry his late mother used to bake on Sunday mornings. I'll never know whether that was a genuine memory or an act of calculated mercy, but I've replayed it 1,000 times since. That Thanksgiving, I'd gotten a small bonus from the hospital and decided to funnel it into a real from-scratch feast, the kind my own mother used to make, where the house smelled like sage and browned butter for 2 days straight. I wanted to offer that warmth to Lucas's family. I'm still not entirely sure why I still craved their approval after 6 years, but I did. I brined the turkey Monday, made the cranberry sauce Tuesday, baked the pies Wednesday. By midnight, I was shaping rolls at the flour-covered island while Lucas watched from the table, pretending to read a journal. "You know you don't have to do all this, right?" he asked. "I want to," I said, and I meant it. We arrived in Westerville at 1 o'clock Thursday, the sky the color of a bruised plum, threatening snow. Poppy sprinted up the walk to ring the doorbell 3 times. Lucas hauled the turkey, grunting under its aluminum fortress. I brought up the rear with grocery bags and 2 pie tins balanced precariously on my forearms. Linda opened the door in a cream cashmere sweater. Her eyes went straight to the pie tin near my chin, not to my face. "Oh," she breathed. "You brought 2 pies. Pumpkin and salted caramel apple." She made a small, unreadable sound and stepped back just enough to let us in. I didn't know it yet, but the countdown had started. The foyer smelled like vanilla diffusers and lemon polish. Cassie was draped across the white sectional with her boyfriend Todd, scrolling her phone. "Wow," she said, glancing up. "You really went all out this year. It was fun. done, I said, unloading Tupperware. Hey, do you do stuffed mushrooms? Ryan used to make this incredible one. Whipped goat cheese panko. Lucas, remember those? Guests literally begged for the recipe. I froze. 10 minutes in, and Ryan had already materialized. Lucas, wrestling the turkey onto the counter, didn't turn around. I really don't remember, Cass. I made the cranberry sauce, I said, a pitch too high. Yeah, Cassie said, still scrolling. She totally would have done the mushrooms, though. Breathe, let it go. 6 years of practice had taught me exactly how to absorb a scratch without bleeding visibly. I preheated the oven, arranged the sides in the fridge, set the roll basket proudly on the island. Warren shuffled through, nodded once, poured coffee, and retreated to his recliner, his version of a full greeting. Linda began to hover, adjusting coasters, wiping invisible smudges. She picked up the roll basket and turned it over like she was appraising a fake Rolex. Did you actually make these yourself? Yes, honey wheat. Took all night. Ryan's mother always brought the loveliest rolls from that bakery on Fifth Avenue, she said, setting the basket back down, voice dipping into manufactured nostalgia. People adored those. I said nothing. I stood there gripping a damp dish towel, letting the silence stretch until the doorbell rang, Warren's brother arriving with his loud wife and their perpetually bored teenage son. The house filled with coats and small talk about the drive-in on I-71. I retreated to the oven, pretending to check the temperature of a bird that was already perfectly done. The next half hour was a master class in polite Midwestern endurance. We stood around a deli cheese log flanked by water crackers, debating the Buckeyes' offensive line and the odds of the coming snowstorm. I held Poppy on my hip while she marched her stuffed giraffe up my sleeve. Later, at the appetizer table, Warren's sister-in-law Brenda pointed at the rolls. Who brought those gorgeous rolls? Stella did, Linda announced before I could answer, in a tone that mixed maternal pride with faint condescension. She insists on doing everything from scratch. Very ambitious. Easy laughter rippled through the room. Not cruel, exactly, but it clung to my skin like static. Cassie piped up again from the sofa. Lucas, was it a crostini Ryan made? Baked brie in the center, I swear. Cassie, I don't remember. Lucas sighed, eyes on the muted TV. I focused on Poppy's stuffed giraffe marching up my sleeve. Brick by brick, I built a fortress. Then Linda drifted back through with a cheese knife, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. His ex always made this so much better. From the sofa, Cassie made a small, satisfied sound. I have replayed that exact moment 1,000 times. I always assumed my breaking point would feel like heat, screaming, a thrown plate. Instead, it felt like ice, a profound, sweeping calm, like a puzzle snapping into place. I lowered Poppy to the couch beside her father, smoothed my shirt, and walked back into the kitchen. The war of attrition was over. It was time for scorched earth. I moved with mechanical efficiency, snapping lids onto containers. Snap, snap, snap. I tore a sheet of foil over the turkey and crimped the edges tight. Linda floated in, wine glass dangling. Stella, the turkey still needs to rest. I know. I'm taking it with me. My voice came out hollow, foreign to my own ears. What? All of it. I slid the mashed potatoes into a bag. You mentioned Ryan's bakery rolls twice in 10 minutes, her mythical mushrooms, and you told the whole family my bread was dense. I met her eyes. I think tonight, everyone here would be more comfortable eating food from somewhere else. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The polish cracked into frantic confusion. Stella, her voice had gone small. I'm not upset, Linda, I said, and it was the truth. The anger had bypassed me entirely. I was just exhausted from pouring everything into something beautiful, only to watch it get turned over and found wanting every single time. Lucas appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene, me taping shut a pie box, his mother frozen by the sink, and stiffened. Stella, I'm taking this to my mother's. You're welcome to stay and order a pizza. I'm taking Poppy. I braced for the mediation, the you know how she gets, the practiced pressure to smooth it over. It never came. Lucas said nothing. He just watched his wife dismantle Thanksgiving. It took 3 trips to load the SUV. I handed Poppy the roll basket and named her chief security officer of the bread. She took the job with fierce solemnity. I backed out of the driveway. The mahogany door stayed shut. No one came outside. My mother, Helen, was watching the Macy's parade finale when we burst through her door in New Albany. She'd spent the morning enjoying quiet solitude, and she heard the commotion in the mudroom before she saw us. She stopped dead in the entryway, tea in hand, taking in the scene. Me, breathless with my coat unzipped, a pie tin balanced in each palm, a 4-year-old beside me clutching a basket of rolls like precious cargo. Good Lord in heaven, she breathed. Stella, what is all this? Happy Thanksgiving, I rasped, the adrenaline finally starting to ebb. My mother has always had a rare gift. She can read an entire essay of suffering off my face in about 2 seconds, and she doesn't need to ask a single clarifying question to know when not to ask. Put those down, was all she said. I'll put the kettle on. Over Earl Grey at her worn oak table, while Poppy sprawled on the living room rug mesmerized by a marching band, I told her everything. The cheese log, the phantom ex, the his ex made this better comment, the quiet packing, all of it. She listened without a single performative gasp of outrage, just absorbed it, the way she always has. Well, she finally said, standing, we're going to need more chairs. She called my Aunt Deb, who called my cousin Wesley, who'd been about to eat a frozen lasagna alone. By the time the turkey finished reheating, 7 of us were crammed around a table built for 5, half on folding stools from the garage. It was chaotic, it was loud, and it was perfect. Not a single single person at that table asked if the rolls had proofed long enough. Not a single person brought up a stranger's recipe for stuffed mushrooms. Cousin Wesley inhaled 2 massive slices of the salted caramel apple pie, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and declared with absolute religious fervor that it was the greatest thing he'd eaten all year. And he said it the way people say things when they have zero ulterior motives. For the first time since my alarm had gone off at 4 that morning, I tipped my head back and laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that rattled in my chest. An hour later, washing dishes at the sink, I heard tires on gravel. Lucas's sedan, parked crooked. He stepped out, coat still on wrong, looking like a man who'd driven too fast without registering the drive at all. My mother intercepted him in the mudroom, offered food he declined, coffee he accepted out of nerves. A few minutes later, he found me at the sink. "Stella, can we talk?" We stepped onto the enclosed back porch, into the specific biting cold of a Columbus November. Solar fairy lights my mother never took down glowed faintly along the fence. "You should have said something to her," Lucas said, staring into the dark garden. "I did, tonight, with my actions. Before it got to this, Lucas, I have been saying something for 6 years. I kept my voice clear, not raised. Every time I showed you the blood, you told me she didn't mean it, that she just needed time. 6 years. How much more time did she need to decide I was worth a seat at her table?" He looked away, silent for a long moment. "I know," he finally said. "Do you?" "Yeah, Stella, I do." And for once, he wasn't defending her. He was just admitting defeat, different from every other version of this fight we'd had since our wedding. "Being here," he said, nodding back toward the sliding glass door, toward the bright, chaotic kitchen where Wesley was currently arguing loudly with Aunt Deb about a movie. "It's just different. This is what a family is actually supposed to feel like," I told him gently. He didn't try to answer that. He didn't need to. We just stood there in the freezing darkness, letting it settle over us. When his phone rang, sharp and jarring. Uncle Ted. I watched the color drain from his face. "What happened? Is he okay?" A pause. He mouthed, "Dad, we're coming." His father had burned his hand trying to fry an egg, the first thing he'd cooked in 30 years, and Uncle Ted had rushed him to urgent care. I didn't ask a single follow-up question. My nurse training simply overrode the domestic dispute we'd been having 30 seconds earlier. "Get in the car," I said, already heading for my keys. We got back to Westerville just past 7. The house felt different now. The manufactured perfection gone, replaced by the smell of scorched butter and panic. Warren sat rigid on the sectional, his hand wrapped in gauze, wearing the sheepish look of a stoic man who'd just embarrassed himself. Cassie sat close beside him. Through the archway, Linda paced the kitchen on the phone, one hand tearing through her hair. Warren's face relaxed with relief the second he saw me. "Let me see," I said, sitting beside him. "It's not that bad, Stella," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Ted overreacted, made me go to the clinic." "You went for a reason," I said. "Let me look." He reluctantly extended his wrapped hand. I turned his wrist gently, inspecting the professional bandage job. Based on the padding and the wince he tried to hide, I could diagnose it easily. A solid first-degree burn edging into second-degree along the tender side of his thumb. Properly dressed, painful for a week, but he'd survive. "What were you trying to make?" He looked toward the kitchen. "For Linda. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. I tried to fry an egg. The butter popped." I stared at this quiet man who'd eaten my terrible buckle and lied kindly about it, who'd never once found fault with anything I'd brought into his house. "Sit tight. I'll make something." I walked into the kitchen. Linda stopped pacing and just stared at me, phone still hovering near her ear. I ignored her entirely and opened her stainless steel fridge. Eggs, a half stick of butter, leftover roasted vegetables, a block of aged cheddar. I moved with the fluid, unthinking grace of someone in their element, preheated the skillet, whisked the eggs frothy, chopped fast. Within 15 minutes, a golden frittata was sliding onto a platter, toast rising beside it. Reaching for more butter, my fingers brushed a forgotten container in the back of the fridge, the half pint of cranberry sauce I'd left behind in my rush to pack the car. I set it on a saucer at the center of the table without a word of commentary. Cassie appeared in the archway, arms crossed. "Stella, I'm really sorry about today. The Ryan thing, I do it, I know I do it, and I don't always hear how bad it sounds until it's too late. That's not an excuse. Is it a habit or a reflex? Both, maybe. She was around a long time. My mom worshipped her. I never really thought about what it's like to be you, hearing that ghost story on repeat. Thank you for saying that. Do you hate me?" The question was almost childlike. "No, Cassie. Frustrated, sure. Never hated." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years, then added, "For what it's worth, those rolls were incredible. I snuck one before you packed them up." After Warren ate his frittata one-handed and praised every bite, we drifted back to the living room. The dynamic had shifted. The curated tension gone, replaced by exhausted relief. Linda sat perched on the sofa edge, quieter than I'd ever seen her. When Cassie stepped out to take a call and Lucas took Poppy upstairs to hunt for the giraffe, it was just me, Warren, and Linda. Linda finally spoke, voice cracking. "I don't know how to start." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I grew up with nothing. Dirt floors, empty cupboards. When you grow up like that, you spend your whole life terrified someone will find out you're a fraud. I got so obsessed with guarding the front door, I forgot the people already inside the house matter more than anyone just passing through it." A tear tracked through her foundation. "I never meant to make you feel compared. Ryan's just a name I say out of habit. I speak without thinking, when I should be thinking about you." She met my eyes. "I know an apology tonight doesn't fix 6 years." "No," I said, "but it's a real start." Later, as I gathered my coat, Warren caught my eye and waited until we were alone. I should have said something a long time ago. He held up his good hand before I could interrupt. trapped. No, it's not okay. I sat in that chair and heard what they said to you year after year and told myself it wasn't my place. This is my house, Stella. You're my family. It was my place to protect you. And I failed. His voice roughened. I'm so sorry. In 6 years, he'd never spoken to me with that kind of directness. I swallowed hard. Thank you, Warren. 2 words. But that night, they were everything. In 6 years of forced Sunday dinners and awkward holidays, my father-in-law had never once spoken to me with that kind of direct, piercing honesty. It felt like a weight had lifted off the whole foundation of the house. We left just past 9. The drive home was quiet, but it was the quiet of a battlefield after a treaty, not the old, suffocating kind. Poppy slept with her giraffe tucked under her chin. Lucas took my hand across the console. I'm going to do better, Stella. I'm going to protect us. I know you are. I meant it, not blindly, but because I'd watched him stand frozen in that doorway and choose, for once, not to smooth things over. He'd let me leave. He'd let me blow the whistle. Some doors take longer than they should to come loose on their hinges. The only real question is whether they ever open at all. The following week spent towards something new. For the first time since our wedding, we hosted Christmas at our own house in Columbus, bracing for tension. But midway through the afternoon, Linda walked into my kitchen, stood by the island watching me chop celery, and without asking permission, picked up a clean dish towel and started drying a wet bowl from the rack. We worked side by side for an hour, silently trading utensils. It wasn't effortless, but for the first time, it felt almost easy. In late January, my mother's ancient furnace gave out during a blizzard, and she stayed with us for 3 nights while the parts were ordered. On the second evening, the roads cleared enough for Linda and Warren to come over for dinner. Afterward, my mother and Linda sat at the kitchen table for over 2 hours, drinking cheap red wine, talking about their own mothers, the things they'd inherited and tried not to pass down, and the things they realized they'd passed down anyway. I didn't listen in on the details, out of respect for their privacy, but at one point I heard a sudden, sharp bark of laughter from the kitchen. It was Linda. It surprised me completely. And then, a moment later, it didn't surprise me at all. The next Thanksgiving, the cycle began again. Same turkey, same cranberries, same midnight rolls, same wool socks. My phone buzzed around 9. Linda. I'm planning on bringing stuffed mushrooms tomorrow, she said, a little nervous. The ones Ryan's mother used to make. I tracked down the real recipe. Do you mind, Stella? Do you mind if I bring them? Something in my chest unfurled. It was the sound of permission being asked, of respect. I don't mind at all. I think that sounds wonderful. Good. I thought I'd bring a double batch to your mother's since she's hosting this year, if that's still okay with her. She'd absolutely love that. And she did. That Thursday, my mother's house in New Albany overflowed. A beautiful, chaotic collision of worlds. Aunt Deb arguing with Wesley, Linda and Warren on the sofa, Cassie and Todd laughing in the corner. We'd pushed 2 dining tables together in the center of the room and pressed every mismatched chair in the house into service, plus 3 ugly metal folding chairs dragged in from the garage. Linda's mushrooms came out of the oven looking like absolute culinary perfection. When Aunt Deb took a bite and demanded the recipe, Linda's face flushed with something that looked suspiciously like genuine happiness. She didn't mention Ryan once, she just smiled and promised to text the ingredients. Poppy spent the whole dinner sitting squarely on Warren's lap, meticulously ripping apart one of my rolls and feeding him tiny pieces with her sticky fingers, and the silent patriarch of the family happily chewed and swallowed every single one. At some point, amid the clinking silverware and overlapping conversations, my mother leaned over and whispered something in Linda's ear that made my previously stoic mother-in-law laugh so fiercely she had to slam her wine glass down to keep from spilling it. I sat quietly in my corner seat at the edge of the borrowed folding table, breathing in the heavy aroma of roasted sage, melted butter, and wood smoke, watching these deeply flawed, complicated people who had, slowly and imperfectly, figured out exactly how to show up for one another. I thought about the same day 1 year earlier, the drive home with a trunk full of rejected love. I hadn't packed up that food out of spite. I did it because I was finally too tired to pretend the pain wasn't real. I learned a real lesson that day. Sometimes the smallest, quietest act of rebellion, simply taking back the love and effort that isn't being appreciated, is the only language loud enough to show people exactly what they've been taking for granted all along. You cannot force someone to respect your table. Sometimes you just have to pack up the feast and build a new table somewhere else. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, they eventually ask for a chair at it. The homemade cranberry sauce circulated the long table twice. Poppy pointed a sticky finger at the ruby red dish and loudly declared to the entire room that it was her absolute favorite food in the whole wide world. Well, little one, you can thank your mother for that, Warren rumbled simply. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. He was just putting a true, beautiful thing out into the universe. I reached across the table and placed my hand over Poppy's small fingers. She squeezed back tightly. Outside the frosted window panes, the late afternoon light was shifting, casting a brilliant, warm gold over the bare, shivering silhouettes of the November trees. I took a slow sip of my wine, surrounded by the beautiful, messy noise of my family. It was, without a single doubt in my mind, the greatest Thanksgiving I could have ever asked for.